We've gotten a lot of questions on like, wait, why are you doing a podcast on Latin America in English?
The Brazilian lawmakers are suggesting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Nubank, I think that it's the largest fintech, like retail fintech company in the world. They're larger than Revolut, Coinbase, Robinhood.
I think the biggest challenge for anyone working in crypto today, I know this is going to change, but today it's the fact that regulations in Latin America are super archaic. They're very slow moving.
Ricardo Salinas Pliego, that's one of the richest in Mexico and in the world. He's a billionaire. Now he's investing in Argentina, and he's a deep Bitcoiner guy. In Latin America, we don't have a culture of questioning things. If you go to a mall and someone tells you, put your face here, we're going to give you something, people are going to do it. So we're live. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first show of Frontera. Frontera is the program where we want to tell you what's really happening in Latin America. We've realized that there's a lot of mystic around Latin America. A lot of people is watching what's happening around Argentina with crecimiento, what's happening in Mexico with remittances, what's happening in Brazil with basically degen products that are widely adopted. And that's why we're building this. I'm the co-founder of Espacio Crypto and the CEO of Bando. I've been in crypto for 8 years building, and I'm really happy to have Kush as my co-host here. Kush,
Crazy, man. I've been a guest of Espacio Crypto podcast before, and now here we are co-hosting. So I'm super pumped and really excited. And for those that don't know me, I'm Kush. I'm the founder of Odyssey. We're an innovation lab accelerating the adoption of crypto and deep tech in Latin America. So super excited for Frontera and what we're going to run through. I think this is going to be like such an awesome like show and a really kind of useful context for the region. But I know we've gotten a lot of questions on like, wait, why are you doing a podcast on Latin America in English? So I feel like that might be like an interesting place for us to start for the audience that's tuning in. What do you think?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I mean, like, we both like are bilingual, right? And both grew up in Latin America, and I think we hosted a Twitter Spaces this week where we were talking about like the launch of this podcast, and we did it in Spanish. And I think there was a question of like, hey, why are you doing like these reports in English? And a lot of the work that we publish at Odyssey is also in English. But I think there's like a few different reasons from my standpoint why English content on Latin America is really valuable, right? So one, there's not everyone in Latin America speaks Spanish, right? Brazil, most notably, anytime you're designing a strategy for Latin America, and you can speak with like crypto or really any industry, is like, all right, we're gonna do this thing, but oh wait, we got to do it in Spanish and Portuguese and English, right? So we can sort of engage with everyone across the continent. But it generally, I think, is you're going to be able to engage with people across the region if you're speaking in Spanish. And then two, I mean, I'd love for you to touch on like the audience and who are also hoping will tune into this podcast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we've realized, and we've both seen this in Espacio Crypto and Odyssey, is that there's a lot of interest in crypto about Latin America. For example, some time ago, I saw some numbers saying that the crypto penetration in Mexico is around 10%. And I used to work at Bitso. I looked at those numbers every day, and that's just so wrong. So there's people out there in the world that want to understand what's happening in this region. And in order I think that English is the most liquid language. It's the best language to have exchanges. And basically, crypto Twitter happens in English, right? So we need to help crypto Twitter, basically everyone in the industry to understand and to show our perspective. That's why it's so critical to have this basically Frontera in English. And also we wanted to have something that it's not like really institutional. It's called Frontera, right? It's in Spanish, and either way we're recording this in English and making all the content in English. We also want to have this footprint of having Latin content and Latin creators, because we know how relevant this region is for the industry. And that's why, Kush, I think that one of the most exciting things that we are starting with is this report that we published. You can subscribe to our newsletter. We'll put it in the show notes. In the second edition of the newsletter, we published a really detailed report on what's happening in Latin America. It's called Latam Crypto Ecosystem, Leading the New Digital Economy. And we discussed about this a lot. And I'm really proud about the result, because it took us a couple of months to create. We have a really experienced research team building this. And at the end, it's something absolutely, it's open source. And by this, I mean that it's public, anyone can see it. And I think that that's something critical for Frontera's success, like being able to publish everything and share the knowledge as much as possible.
Man, this report is insane. Like, 53 pages of insights, just detailed data. I think this is like I'm such a research nerd, and it's something that we like. I just love like reading and learning, and I think that's where innovation ultimately comes from, right? Is being able to like extrapolate and make and create new insights in the world, right? And that's literally what we did with this report. I mean, it's really, really like fascinating and just huge tip of the hat to the whole research team, because this is just, I mean, for anyone that has any questions on the state of crypto in Latin America and has a few hours on their hands, give this report a read, because it's next level.
Yeah, I think that's one of the objectives that we have. That Frontera is this place where someone that wants to understand what's happening in Latam, they say, okay, these guys have Frontera. They've been in crypto for a lot. They're crypto natives. We are researchers. We are founders. We are creators, and that's basically the most important thing for us, like sharing all this information. And so let's go down on what's happening this week in Latin America. This is gonna be, we're gonna do these weekly episodes where we go through the news focused in Latam, because there's so much content around there about what's happening in crypto. You can go elsewhere to understand what's happening today with meme coins, what's happening today with restaking, with layer twos, with Solana, with Ethereum, whatever. But you cannot go somewhere to understand really what happened in Latam, right? So I'd like to start discussing Brazil. In the Twitter space, well, X space that we hosted yesterday, we were laughing on how Brazilians are really degens, or they are the most degen country in Latin America. And we say this because they are the most advanced or financially complex population. And a really interesting thing that happened this week is that the Brazilian lawmakers are suggesting a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And I think that this is, I'm not sure, I think it's the first country after the US to publish this. This tells you how degen they are.
Yeah, we were like, it's so funny. Anytime you meet a Brazilian, they're always gonna tell you about like their stocks and the fact that they bought Bitcoin and they hold crypto and this and that. And I think the like investing culture in Brazil is so unlike anywhere else that I've seen in Latin America. But you know, I think this is a really fascinating trend of people basically wanting to front run the U.S. potential of a U.S. Bitcoin national reserve as well, right? Because if the U.S., I mean, and they're proposing to come in with size, right? And they're basically saying like, listen, if we're going to set up a national Bitcoin reserve, we're going to do it at a massive scale. And so I really think that like that's where a lot of this is coming from. I mean, I think it's so fair to say that Bitcoin at this point has hit like escape velocity and is just totally a part of the kind of traditional and very established world. I mean, I think El Salvador, speaking of Latin American like countries in the region that are killing it, I think El Salvador has just done an amazing job as well of adopting Bitcoin, integrating as its as legal tender as well, right? And I remember a few months ago, back in sort of the depths of the bear market, right? Sort of early this year, people were critiquing El Salvador for deploying a capital into a Bitcoin pool. And now what are we seeing? We're seeing like all of these countries basically pile on after the US. And I think Brazil is just such a great example of this unfolding in real time. And I'm sure we'll see more of this.
Definitely. And you know, when you look at the proposal of this strategic Bitcoin reserve, que es la Reserva Estratégica Soberana de Bitcoins, RESBIT, it's how they are naming it. Dude, it's basically a copy paste of the proposal of the strategic Bitcoin reserve of the US. They're proposing to allocate 5% of Brazilians' international reserves that are around of 372 billion USD to Bitcoin. And something that I think a lot about is, if the US creates that strategic Bitcoin reserve, what can everyone else do? They are just going to be forced to do something similar. And it looks like the Brazilian people and this Brazilian congressperson is trying to front run that opportunity. And as you said, something that it's really interesting in El Salvador. El Salvador is a much smaller economy. Still, they have one of the most interesting presidents in Bukele. I think that he might want to be like the Elon Musk of presidents, because he's kind of troll. He tweeted the chill guy. And also he posted on Instagram his portfolio that it's, I don't know, it seems like CoinMarketCap, like a UI of CoinMarketCap in mobile. And he posted, he has a balance, or well, not he, but El Salvador has a balance of 540 million USD, and he's up 100%. When people call him crazy, now he's posting this, like trolling everyone.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, El Salvador, like they buy a Bitcoin every single day, right? And in the depths of the bear market, there's a website called naivetracker.com where you can actually see all of they're like posts every time El Salvador's been buying Bitcoin, for example, and you can basically track El Salvador's performance over the course of their foray into this whole setting of naivetracker.com. There you go. And you can see like they're up substantially on their Bitcoin investment, right? And of course, like I think that's the question, like for a nation state ultimately is like, if we have any spare cash, like where are we going to pile it into, right? And there's going to be very few other places that are going to give you the returns that Bitcoin will consistently over the course of time, and also like de-risk, right? I mean, there's also, and maybe I'm sure we'll get to a point where nation states are taking like much heavier risk on bets in this ecosystem. But I think Bitcoin is just like the gold standard, and we'll see a lot more countries. They're up 113%, as you mentioned, right? So this is just like a trend that I'm sure will continue to follow. But I'm curious, like jumping back to the Brazil point, like what do you think? Like, what would you attribute the Brazilian kind of investing mindset to, right? Like, what do you think it comes down to, and where does that necessity arise from?
Yeah, I used to work for a Brazilian company for 4 years when I did management consulting, so I'm pretty close, or I understand that culture as much as a foreigner can, right? I'm not a native Brazilian, but something that I can attribute it to, and maybe we need to bring some Brazilian people to the show to understand a little bit better. They are a lot more risk taking, just as a culture, and you can see that in their personal lives, and you can see that in their investment like strategies. For example, personally, they are like culturally they are really open, and they are really straightforward to take risks. So that's a really important thing that culturally is not similar elsewhere in Latam, I think. Another important part is that they have a really developed stock market. So they are used to invest in government bonds that yielded, like when Brazil was booming, you remember this macroeconomic trend of the BRICS that was Brazil, Russia, India, and China, this huge like set of countries that were supposed to be, or well, they became some of the most advanced or the fastest growing economies in the world. And they are a culture that investing is embedded in them. So when you say, if you've been close to buying bonds since you were 18 years old, that maybe for people in the US or elsewhere that's obvious, but in Latin America it's absolutely not obvious. People just save in their couches. So they have this mindset that they are more risk taking, and they are closer to financial assets. So when you give them crypto, that's why they are, even as a government, they are, I think, that the most advanced government in Latin America exploring CBDCs. And that's another news that came this week, that their CBDC project integrated chainlink. And I just want to show how crazy this is. Like, they are actually using a deep crypto protocol for their CBDC. Where else in the world this is happening?
It's crazy. It's crazy. No, I think, just to like recap on, if you look at the landscape of really successful fintechs in Brazil and they're pro like finance, Brazil is an order of magnitude, literally an order of magnitude further ahead than most other countries out there. And I think that just like, especially in Latin America, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's just like, one, they have a really high degree of technical education that has managed to come into the country. Brazil is like a fairly well off country as well, very well resourced, right? They've got a huge landmass. I mean, it takes up something like 50% of the South American landmass is Brazil, or thereabouts. And so I think that just has allowed them to really accelerate their economy and be able to push forward for a lot of innovation. They're also, given that they're such a massive country, they also have to rely on like kind of these very tech, internet positive approaches, right? It's like, how else do you reach people like deep in sort of these rural areas in Brazil, right? So I think that's like another forcing function for them. I know there's a lot of policy work going on. Mila Rioja, who's a very good friend, she does a ton of work, and she's based in Brazil and is very much so trying to figure out, hey, how do we get policymakers caught up to speed on how do we push forward kind of innovative technologies. I think she'd be an amazing guest for us to have as well. But I think, ultimately the question is like, how do we continue to scale this in the region as well, right? How do we get more countries deploying their currencies on chain? I think there's also like, with this CBDC narrative and just generally like on-chain transactions, the privacy angle is something I'm personally really worried about. And I think that that's where like the role of ZK comes in. And the thing about working with the government is, once you've established your CBDC, I mean, we, like some of us here, and I'm sure a lot of the audience is familiar, like if you have to work with a public body in Latin America, the rate of change is so damn slow that we really have to do it right. And if we're going to roll out CBDCs and if we're going to roll out these sort of government-backed coins, like let's make sure that it happens in the right way, and let's make sure that we're actually like implementing this in a very thoughtful way that ultimately doesn't lead to undesired outcomes later on down the road.
Yeah, something that I think frequently about CBDCs is that I think that as an industry, we might not be thinking about them in the right way, because stable coins and CBDCs should be just tokenized fiat. And when you see it like from that angle, it makes a lot more sense to say that basically the dollar obviously is winning in tokenized fiat. Why? Because of stablecoins, and we've seen the value of stablecoins running on decentralized ledgers. I don't need to stress how important that has been for the industry in the last years, right? The thing that I think that it's a little bit worrying is that in places like Latin America, I'm not sure that we have the technological progress and founder drive to implement this type of solutions. There are really interesting teams like our friends of Minteo that they are building stablecoins in the region, and that's going to be really important. And a lot of people might think, why stablecoins are like local stablecoins? Why are they so relevant for Latam? And it's a lot of people say, well, they can have the dollar. Why do you need Brazilian real or Mexican peso? And it's just a matter of access to better financial systems. And if you ever have a link or you ever have a liquidity pool between, let's say, a tokenized Mexican peso and the USD, basically you're into the financial system of Web3 in just a swap. And that's huge. So I think that stablecoins in Latin America are not going to be something about trading. They're going to be about on and off ramp. But that's critical for our industry. So yeah, the Brazilian people are really advanced. And something that I also wanna discuss with you, Kush, is let's take a step back and remember that Nubank is the largest. I think that it's the largest fintech, like retail fintech company in the world. They're largest than Revolut, Coinbase, than Robinhood. They're huge, and they are constantly doubling down on their crypto offering. And last week they implemented a swap feature. So, like the classical crypto UI, you select an asset, then you select the other asset, and you swap. Basically, they've implemented it. And in the newsletter that we sent last week, we go through the different steps that they've implemented in their crypto product. They even launched a new coin that was a referral, like a loyalty program that then they rolled back. Though they've also partnered with Circle. They also have their infrastructure in Fireblocks. So basically, I think that Nubank is one of the products, like a sleeping giant in crypto. Not a lot of people talk about them, but they're huge. And they are in this country where crypto makes a lot of sense. That's Brazil. So how do you see Nubank interacting with crypto in the following years? Do you think that they're going to be like this huge bank running on crypto rails? They're going to go more crypto. What's your perspective?
I mean, I think everyone's going to go more crypto, right? Like, I think it's not a matter of like if, it's rather a matter of when. And so, I think that like Nubank, obviously, it's funny, right? I think when we talk about like drivers of adoption and this and that, like the main, and this is what a lot of folks across the ecosystem are doubling down on too, right? Is like, if you own that user relationship in whatever function, right? Like for Nubank, it allows you to hold reales and send them and invest and, allocate capital and just like a traditional quote unquote neobank. And they own that user relationship. And then they're like, oh, by the way, we're going to offer crypto. And the jumping point from you like holding your assets in digital reales to then owning USDC or having access to DeFi protocols within the same app, that is just like so damn powerful. But I think the most important thing for the folks who are out there like thinking about, hey, how do I engage with these, with users in the region ultimately? It's like, think about where those users currently sit. I really like, to be honest, I mean, I'm curious, right? Because I spend a lot of time in Central America and Northern South America as well. And I don't see there being yet a winner, right? Like I think Nubank has absolutely done a great job in Brazil. Although when you talk to Brazilians too, they're like, yeah, Nubank was really great when it first launched, and now there's been a ton of competition that's kind of cannibalizing that market. And from what I gather from some folks is, even superior products that maybe we don't hear about on a regular basis. But I know there's a ton of neobanks that are out there kind of giving Nubank a run for its money. So I think we'll definitely, Nubank by necessity is going to have to start offering better products. Crypto undoubtedly is a better product, right? So I think it makes a lot of sense they're going to keep leaning into this. They did have this new coin, right, which they launched in 2023. So last year they launched it. I think the value of the new coin, which was sort of like an incentives-based coin based on a certain amount of transactions or value that you held in your account, and then they would give you this token. And they pretty much out of nowhere just decided like, hey, we're no longer going to offer this. So I think that we are going to see kind of a shift towards crypto across the fintech stack. And I will say this though, and I think this is just like a macro problem that Latin America faces. And I'd love your thoughts. I mean, you worked at Bitso, right, which is Mexico's biggest crypto company. Like, I think the biggest challenge for anyone working in crypto today, and I know this is going to change, but today, it's the fact that regulations in Latin America are super archaic. They're very slow moving, and they are not pro innovation, by and large, right? Like I think again, El Salvador is just like a totally different story. I think there's a couple of other exceptions that I would point towards. By that said, I do think that that's going to be one of the biggest deterrents for people building stable coins, for people trying to launch crypto products, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's just going to be like massive challenge for folks. But I was curious to get your thoughts on like when you were at Bitso and like you work with management consulting across the region, like what did you see with regards to this intersection of regulation, innovation, technology, and how we roll out new products across the region?
Yeah, I think that it's a complex topic because, for example, in Mexico, regulation is really archaic in the sense that we have this thing called the fintech law that basically it's a wall for all innovation. That's why there's not a lot of competition in Mexico, and Bitso is such a dominating player. And one thing that I think it'll change in the upcoming years is that there are two ways of building crypto products. With the DeFi mullet, that is fintech in the front, DeFi in the back, that I think that a lot of crypto companies are going to go that way, basically just implementing crypto rails to make their product a lot more efficient. I can name a bunch of fintech companies in Latin America that will do that. There is a lot of examples of dollarized products, dollarized accounts using stablecoins that follow this approach. This approach in a regulatory way is a lot easier because basically rails are just much more efficient, and it's an infrastructure play in that sense. The second thing is building a crypto, like a front-facing crypto product, like a trading app or enabling something more like DeFi liquidity pools and all of that stuff. And I think that when you go that way, we haven't been able to achieve traction of those type of products in Latin America. One, because the user don't demand those type of products that much. And the second one is because it's almost impossible in a regulatory sense to implement them. Right now that we're building Bando, that it's more a global product, we've identified how the best way is. Like, you need to be really conscious and you have a lot of awareness on what's the best regulatory play. And it's important to have that approach. Just saying that, in my experience building products, whenever you put the regulation as part of a business requirement and front and center, it makes innovation a lot slower. And that's a fact. Also, we need to protect investors and all of that. But I think that as a region, we need to get to a good balance between economical progress or technological progress and regulation. That right now it's really archaic, I think, in Latin America.
I totally agree. I mean, we speak with like tons of founders on a regular basis, and specifically for those operating in Latin America, like regulation is the number one factor that tends to get in their way, whether or not they sort of like observe it in that present moment. But especially if you're thinking of like, again, I think things that will be really successful in Latin America are going to be stable coins. They're going to be lending protocols. They're going to be wallets. I think will be really fascinating. Crypto banks, basically, without abstracting away all this complexity. But the number one thing that's going to slow these folks down is going to be regulation. And that regulation it's archaic on purpose, right? It's literally set up and built that way so that newcomers do not disrupt incumbents. And that's, again, one of the really big challenges in Latin America. We come from these very traditional post-colonial societies whereby power structures are super centralized, right? It's like in Guatemala, something like 0.01% of the population owns more than 50% of the country's wealth, right? So when we're talking about income disparities and power structures and the need for decentralization, like this is not unique to Guatemala. I mean, it's a story that's relevant throughout the world, but I think it's particularly bad in Latin America. It's because we're coming out of relatively new sort of like independence, right, as of 200 years ago for pretty much most of the region. So we're still these very fairly young societies that hold where the regulatory bodies basically are, I would say, captured by those who are uninterested in putting innovation forward movements, right? And so I think that it's like figuring out the strategy there, figuring out how we get buy-in from people across the kind of regulatory landscape throughout the region would be super important. And I've got a ton of ideas there, but that's like a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah, my final take on understanding how the gears of a product are connected, I think that there's going to be a really regulated touch point between crypto and fiat. And there are going to be certain companies that win that. I think that Bitso is really well positioned to do that connection between fiat and crypto. And then what happens in the crypto world with maybe an account abstraction wallet, that's going to be a different story. And we're about to see that change. We're about to see that because we are at that point in the technology where we have better wallets, we have layer twos, we have Solana, we have now this infrastructure that can enable that. So let's see. And I think that that's a greenfield for Latin American products, or not necessarily Latin American products, but products in Latin America, products that want to deploy in Latam. And they should listen to this podcast because they're gonna get so much insight. Man, I wanna move on to Argentina. Did you listen to Milei's podcast with Lex Friedman?
I did. That guy is a walking library. I didn't realize like how deep in academia he was until I heard that podcast, and he just started like citing all these different authors, and his economic theory is super grounded, and I really respect that for him. I really respect anyone who's like, especially as a politician, has the capacity to ground themselves in knowledge versus whatever you perceive an audience wants, specifically as a politician, right? And yeah, I'm curious, like, what did you think of it?
Oof, I don't know. I think that I've listened to it once, and I was at the gym listening to it, and I was like, I need a notebook because I'm I'm fluent in economy. I'm not an economist, but 8 years in crypto, you must be fluent in these topics, right? But he was so articulate about macroeconomic debt and how that's tied to inflation, and how like the size of the state was a huge obstacle for Argentina's growth, and how they've reduced it with this policy that they called the chainsaw. And just to get these numbers, they were having inflation rates that were 200% yearly. Now they're gonna if you have the annualized inflation rates, now it's below 20%. That's a lot better, and that's just crazy. And I texted a couple of Argentinian friends, and I told them, dude, like, what's happening with this guy? Is this real? Like, why is not everyone celebrating this? And the consensus answer that I got was, this is real. Inflation's got a lot better. If you go to Buenos Aires today, everything is more expensive in dollar terms. That's good because basically their money, their currency is not going to zero. And another interesting fact is how in Argentina this new government is attracting investment and innovation. Basically, Argentina before Milei was uninvestable because of corruption, because of inflation, because of currency debasement, because of a lot of things. And now it's investable. It's so investable that there are so new business people entering Argentina. And the news is that Ricardo Salinas Pliego, that's one of the richest man in Mexico and in the world, he's a billionaire. Now he's investing in Argentina, and he's a deep Bitcoiner guy. And this is just like a flashlight, right? Something that is interesting, but we've never seen this convergence. We've never seen a bull market, an Argentinian booming economy, and like the demand for crypto in Argentina. I can only start to imagine the things that are going to happen there. And next year, crecimiento is going to happen again. So, and we're going to be there, like covering it and analyzing what's happening. It's really exciting to see this convergence of factors that I think might take Argentina to the next level of crypto adoption and like real use cases.
Yeah, I think, Argentina in the crypto ecosystem has just been a world leader, right? And let alone in Latin America. I think if you're thinking about, countries in the region that have really just absolutely killed it, and in the Frontera report, you highlight how many projects are coming out of that region. I think that there's Milei has done just a great job of pushing forward sort of innovation and a much more liberal approach to the way he handles the economy, and we are seeing positive signs come out of the region, right? Like reduction in inflation and reduction in poverty, and anecdotally, but that's like kind of what the data tells you. Anecdotally, when you go to Argentina and you're actually there, like inflation isn't quite as bad, but it also, the country isn't quite as cheap as it used to be, which it was somewhat infamous for as well. And so I think there's sort of some shifts there. When you look at the data, sometimes it's very hard to understand how people are living there day to day. But I was there for the first batch of crecimiento that just went down. They're doing another smaller pop-up in December. I'm actually going to be heading down to that as well. And there'll be another one coming up next year too. I think the crecimiento movement and the general like ethos behind what's happening there is really appealing and really exciting. And I think it is like the most important thing when it comes to thinking about how do we drive forward adoption through these types of engagements and activations is how do we get like local buy-in? How do we get people really excited about these types of movements? How do we show people that it's valuable, right? Because it can be a little bit disconcerting if like lots of people just show up out of the blue and you're like, hey, who are these people? What are they doing in my country? Like, what? And specifically, if we're talking about like technology and innovation, all of these like totally brand new concepts, I think that localization and sort of tropicalización, sort of tropicalization. I don't know if that translates exactly over in English, but the notion that, hey, we want to like just kind of meet you where you're at right now. I think that's going to be super important for what's happening in Argentina, and just like generally when we talk about embedding and engaging and fostering these like tech and innovation movements, is like, let's make sure that we're giving people value, because that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah, definitely. Next year, I think that we're gonna hang around Argentina and cover what's happening there. Also, we have a bunch of friends there building really, really, really cool stuff. And I want to go to. I saw this post on LinkedIn about what are the payment methods in Argentina, and I wanted to include it in this episode because it's really interesting to see how we have like the usual suspects. Visa is present in every country. MasterCard is present in every country. American Express is present in every country. But then there's a big pulverization around the top countries in Latin America: Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, Chile, and Uruguay. For example, in Mexico, we have this thing that is OXXO, that it's basically a retail store, like a convenience store. It's that they have like tens of thousands of locations, and they are now becoming like a bank branch where you can buy beer, you can buy chips, and you can do payments. And that's kind of crazy. That's Latam, really. Then in Brazil, you have this thing called Pix, that it's one of the most successful payment methods in the world. It's like you scan a QR and you do the payment instantly. The adoption has been increasing consistently. And I wanted to include this, Kush, because I think that in a couple of years, we're going to see this chart. And instead of this type of companies, we're going to see stablecoins on Solana, stablecoins on Ethereum. That's the first thesis. The second one is that we're going to see this chart instead of watching like local payment systems like Spay or Clap in Chile. We're going to see crypto startups running on decentralized rails. And that's just a matter of time. And I say that it's a matter of time because, for example, the largest remittance corridor in the world is Mexico-US. And during the last year, Bitso processed around of 10% of that remittance corridor. That it's around of $6 billion. So this is already happening. And I just want to get your take on where do you see payments in the region?
I mean, I think like the OXXO point sort of points to what you were sharing earlier around the notion that, frankly, like it's all about that relationship with the users at the end of the day, right? And so OXXO is like where you go when you're in Mexico. You're like, hey, I need to go buy some gum. I'm gonna go OXXO. I need to go fill up with gas. I need to go buy like water. Like you go to OXXO all the time when you're in Mexico, right? And so all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, I like my gas station convenience store also, allows me to send and receive money. That's pretty cool. Like I don't have to think of something else, right? It's just like the way human psychology works. Like we've created these sort of trust relationships with the brand. And I mean, like payments, again, another area that I think is super fascinating for Latin America. Frankly, because it just implies that, it's like the payment experience today is I have to freaking walk around. I hate coins. Like if there's one thing I hate in this world, and I don't hate many things, it's having to have coins, right? They're clunky. They are super annoying. You get like 5 cents worth of a coin. And for me, it's just like that is such a horrible user experience compared to say something like Apple Pay, right? So I think that payments is another area that's going to be disrupted. Like Visa's obviously making moves here, working very closely with the Solana ecosystem, with the Circle ecosystem. So we'll just see more and more and more of that. And that's where the local stablecoins piece comes in, right? Because I think that's another interesting angle of is like, do we want the whole world to run on USDC? Or, Circle's now entering with EURC, right? The Euro stablecoin. Or I've seen a few other folks, you mentioned Miteo, there's like, sort of probably about a half dozen or so local stablecoin builders. And those are all folks that I think will be super, super important for our ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting to see stablecoins and how it's going to be adopted. Oh, and this is also a big topic to discuss, more on an economic philosophy. Technically, I don't, depending on what you believe and also like on sovereignty and everything, but the best currency should win. The only thing that is impeding the best currency to win is technological implementation. When I see this chart of the different payment methods around Latin America, it remembers me, it gets me to remember how like private internet was a thing, like AOL and the Microsoft network. I don't even remember what was their name, but there was a time where they had more demand, more users, more monthly active users, paying an internet intranet subscription to AOL than like the public internet. And eventually the public internet won. I think that that's the perfect analogy with like walled gardens on payment rails. Let's see how that evolved.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that quickly before we move on to the next topic, I think that analogy speaks to like so many other benefits of developing in the open and like open source building, open source technology, open source money. And it's why something like Bitcoin has really taken off. And also, again, it just comes back to like, I know we're going to have people listening to this podcast who are building stablecoin payments and the protocols to sort of unlock stablecoins in Latin America. Like, go back and study like early internet history, go back and study why closed systems fail versus why open systems ultimately won, because that will hopefully give you a lot of like architectural insights on how you should be building your protocols as well with regards to stablecoins. I think that's something that I would really like encourage folks to do. But yeah, I'm happy to move on to what we've got next on the docket.
Yeah, perfect. So a quick recommendation: read the book. It's a really good read, really fun read. How the internet happened from Netscape to the iPhone. Great read about to understand this. How walled gardens never win. In information wants to be free, money wants to be free. That's why decentralized ledgers makes a lot of sense versus closed systems like SpaceX or any of that sort. The next thing is Worldcoin. Let's talk Worldcoin. This has been really polemic. Like this topic orb that feels sci-fi, but not the cool sci-fi, but the bad sci-fi. The take is that it has a lot of traction, or not a lot of traction necessarily, but there's a big bet of Worldcoin in Latam, and two news happened this week about that. They are starting operations in Brazil, and they are aggressively expanding in the region. And one other super interesting news is that Rappi is like the Grab of Southeast Asia. Rappi is in Latam. It's a super app. They have ride hailing, they have food delivery, they have banking, and they partnered with Worldcoin to scan eyeballs, go to your house and scan eyeballs in Argentina. So two things. This just tells me how much money Worldcoin has, one. And the second one, they're starting in the regions that it makes a lot more sense to have UBI in these regions. Not only because of like the economical reasons of UBI, but because people are willing to scan their eyeballs for tokens that might worth nothing or something. It's just so interesting, like from anthropological point of view, that this is happening in a region.
Yeah, I mean, if you study sort of what's been happening with Worldcoin, they're basically like Latin America has been one of the fastest growing regions for them, right? I think Argentina in particular. I remember it was some crazy stat, like half of Buenos Aires has had their iris scanned. There's just like some overwhelming amount of people in Buenos Aires have engaged with Worldcoin in some way or another. And don't quote me on that specific stat, but I know it's just like an amount that you read and you're like, okay, this is just insane. By that said, yeah, I mean, like there's so many different ways of like kind of going into this. I guess the Latin American angle is, of course, you're going to scan your eyeball for, some money. Like it just makes a lot of sense for people in perhaps like more vulnerable situations who will end up getting a few world tokens. I will say this. I don't know if you've seen this in Mexico, but I remember being in Bogota and there was a Worldcoin stand and right next to it was like a P2P like vendor basically that was basically looking to like offer you to buy your Worldcoin tokens and was arbitraging. You get these Worldcoin tokens and then this guy basically was like, hey, I'll buy your tokens off you right now for like a 30% discount and I'll just give you cash for the token, right? And I did see that behavior happening in Bogota, which I thought was just like, yeah, people, do they care about like the world token? Not right now. I think what they ultimately care about is having that cash. And so I would guess that a lot of people aren't really like sort of thinking about the deeper implications of this, specifically when it comes to privacy and security. And I think like Worldcoin has done really concerted efforts to take that into account, frankly. When we talk about privacy and security. By that said, I wonder, I do question a lot of the assumptions around like UBI. I think the like identity layer for crypto is super needed on so many fronts. I mean, it's just like such a prerequisite for us being able to operate on more complex, like build more complex financial systems and governance systems and economic systems. Like we need an identity layer. Worldcoin, I think, so far has been doing the best job at this, right? They launched World Change, they rebranded to World just now, so I think they're heading in the right direction. I do wonder, like, the extent to which there's sort of that how much value we're bringing to people today in Latin America
Yeah.
with the world. Like, what do you think of that?
Well, that's a hard one because a lot of takes are. The first thing is that it's just so obvious that we need tokenized identity in the blockchain with everything that's happening with AI agents. Specifically, that thing is just enough to prioritize this implementation of identity in the blockchain, right? And regarding people in Latin America, also, I think that in Latin America we don't have a culture of questioning things. So if you go to a mall and someone tells you, like, put your face here, we're gonna give you something, people are gonna do it, and people do it. I was just researching, and there's around of 500,000 people in Argentina have scanned their eyeballs. That's around 1% of the population, and that's crazy. I would love to I'll analyze those numbers for like the complete extreme would be something like Germany, where they don't even want their buildings on Google Maps or in Street View. In Latin America, it's completely different, right? So I think that a lot of people just go and scan their eyeballs because it's an interesting experience, and they're not at all interested in the tokens. And there were also some stories a couple of months ago that people were, I don't know, I'll never do this, but people took their mom, their dad, their brother, their sister, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, and they scanned 10 people, and then they had like 10 wallets with UBI, right? Like some degen realized that was profitable, and they did that. That's it breaks the whole point of doing it, you know?
Totally. But I think, if I was in World's position, I would take that. I would say we have a really strong incentive here that we're giving people. And I would take that responsibility really seriously. Like, people are onboarding at a faster rate on World than probably any other crypto protocol today. And how do you design the World incentives in such a way whereby the first thing that you do is like cash out immediately right next door, and you like forget the on-chain economy? Like, I think the responsibility and the onus is on World to say, hey, we found this like super easy way to get millions and millions of people onboarded. Let's now figure out how we keep them in this on-chain economy, and let's show them that there's a lot of value here, because otherwise we aren't really going to get too far. And people just be like, oh yeah, like I just put. And if you look at the Worldcoin like stands, it's super shiny, really sexy like orbs. And I've never seen anything like that in Latin America, right? Of course I'm going to go up to it and be like, yo, what's this? Like, why is this person? Oh yeah, you're giving me like some money? Hell yeah, I'll scan my eyeball. I don't care. Thanks, bye. But that's not what we want. That's not what we're aiming for. And I think it's like, I'm really excited to see like World basically take a more meaningful approach to keeping people engaged in this on-chain economy.
Yeah, my position is that I'm bullish on WorldCoin because at least they're trying something extremely hard, and I give a lot of respect to those type of projects. It's gonna be interesting to see how they evolve in Latin America. And man, you have some announcements to share to close this first Frontera episode.
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, just thank you to anyone who's listening. We're really grateful to be working on this project with I've reached out, and it was just like such an obvious yes. There's this like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. And that's been, I think, just like a life philosophy that I'm really just like adopting across so many different verticals of my life. When I've reached out, I was like, hey, want to start working with you? Let's make Frontera happen. I was like, hell yes, like let's make it happen, man. So firstly, just that, like, super grateful for you and the Espacio Crypto team for setting this up. Second thing that I wanted to share as well, for those of you that are listening, like, I think the reason Frontera exists is so that we can accelerate the on-chain economy in Latin America. Odisea, which is the innovation lab that I'm a part of, just announced our accelerator today. So in January 2025, we're going to be kicking off a 10-week program where we're going to be working with 50 to 20 of Latin America's best founders. We partnered with Mantle, who is an amazing ecosystem, super hands-on, very excited to support builders in Latin America to make this program happen. So the best teams in the program will be getting a $20,000 grant. There'll be a ton of other incentives that we'll be bringing on board. We've got a next level set of partners and advisors that are going to be joining us. We've got Cami Russo from the Defiant, Martin Carrica, founder of Mountain Protocol, Abs, one of the advisors. We've got Leighton, in fact, speaking of World, who's the head of ecosystem there. Just a really, really top-notch set of folks who are going to be joining us for this program. So I'm just super, super pumped to make this happen. If you want to apply, odisea.xyz/apply. It'll take you 20, 30 minutes to submit an application. And that's it. Yeah, man, I mean, thank you again for the time. And we look forward to getting your applications here. Feel free to reach out to us on Twitter if you have any questions, any suggestions as well on the format of what we're doing, any feedback on the content. Like, what we want to make sure that we do, like what we end up hoping Frontera leads to, is more people kind of coming on board, more ecosystems being interested in Latin America, and just more energy coming into this whole ecosystem. So really, really pumped up, and thanks for kind of conjuring and making this happen as well.
Man, I'm really pumped about this because I've realized that I've had some like life mottos that dominated decades of my life. During the first 10 years of my life, I'm not sure what was it, but from the when I was 20 to 30, my motto was making it happen, make it happen, just like do it, right? And I think that that's what we've achieved with Frontera. And right now, what dominates me is win and help win. That's something that I took from a mental model from Balaji. And basically, what you're building, that's it. Like, we need to win and help win as a region, as an industry. And I'm really, my position on how I hate thinking of things like the AVE for Latam, the X for Latam. We have just so different needs that we need to build towards them. And Frontera is one of those things. And the accelerator you're building, it's one of those things. So I'm really excited about it. Go to odisea.xyz/apply and just do it, just apply, make that happen. And man, thank you for this first episode. We have a lot of surprises for people. These weekly podcasts are our first production, but we're gonna do such an amazing content to help people understand our region, the products. So excited to go on this adventure with you. Thank you, man. Any closing thoughts?
No, it's been great. Again, just appreciate everyone's time. It's such a data-filled world today, and everyone's sort of vying for your attention. That for anyone who just is just like engaged and interested and keen, keep tapping in. We're gonna be doing these super informative, very high level, very engaging sessions on a weekly basis. And we are the biggest Latam bulls that you're gonna meet. We're so excited about bringing crypto to this region. So this is gonna be such a great selling point for a lot of builders.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's do it. Also go to bando.cool. If you have a wallet, an app, or you simply want to enable on-chain payments, we are your folks. And as I say, thank you for listening and see you next time.
Ciao.